Welcome to CityWorks, a co-production of the City University of New York School of Labor and Urban Studies and CUNY TV. I'm Laura Flanders. Every month, CityWorks explores the challenges and lived experiences of working people on the job, at home, and in our communities. As we near the end of this election cycle, we are turning our attention to the state of our democracy and what this historic election means for the nation's future. On last month's program, I spoke with union leaders about organized labor's political concerns, strategies, and expectations. On today's program, we're going to be speaking with labor scholars and movement organizers about their work and their perspectives in this pivotal moment. Alethia Jones, a distinguished lecturer at the CUNY School of Labor and Urban Studies, is a former global director of the Fellowships Program at the Open Society Foundations and former director of education and leadership development at 1199 SEIU United Healthcare Workers East. Stephan Luce, professor of labor studies at the CUNY School of Labor and Urban Studies, is author and co-author of many books and articles on labor and living wage campaigns and movements, including Fighting for a Living Wage and, most recently, Practical Radicals: 7 Strategies to Change the World. Maria Stephan, an award-winning author and organizer, is founder and former director of the Program on Nonviolent Action at the U.S. Institute of Peace. She's held many other leadership roles, including at the U.S. State Department's Bureau of Conflict and Stabilization Operations and the International Center on Nonviolent Conflict. Currently, she is co-lead and chief organizer for the Horizons Project. Dr. Stephan is co-author of Why Civil Resistance Works: The Strategic Logic of Nonviolent Conflict. Welcome all. I am glad to have you with me in this critical time, in this critical month leading up to election 2024, which seems to have taken us on such a roller coaster ride, but we are getting close, at least to election day, which may or may not be the end of it. Let's just start with how you're feeling. We're going to be hearing a little bit later from an event that happened at SLU about ensuring democracy's future. And I think I would start there, Alethia, with you. As you think about the state of U.S. democracy, well, how are you feeling? What are you thinking? And when it comes to ensuring its future, you think we're well positioned right now?
I think it's precarious. I think it's a fight. I think it's really important for many people who may have sat on the sidelines and only been observers for some time to get off the sidelines and enter the game. This election is certainly critical, but it's also more than just one election at stake. And I'm not sure if we're quite ready as a nation for the kind of disruption and potential violence that might occur after the election when votes are contested. So it's really important that whoever wins, wins with a strong margin. That's usually the only deterrent to the kind of shenanigans that have been promised by the Trump folks.
Yeah. Maria, coming to you on that same question, how are you feeling, thinking about the state of our democracy on this precarious edge?
Yeah, I share Alethia's sense that we are facing a precarious situation in the U.S. We've been witnessing in the country a rise of authoritarianism that mirrors the rise of authoritarianism around the world. We've seen about 18 consecutive years of backsliding democracy, rising autocracy globally. And in the U.S., of course, we have a long history of authoritarianism in our country, and yet we're seeing remarkable organizing. I think we've seen a new infusion of hope, of lightness, a sense that of what is possible. And I think we can see the two very clear directions. We either can go backwards towards a more exclusionary past, or we can continue to move forward towards the aspiration of a multiracial democracy. So I think that the stakes are really clear. The election is important, and I also agree with Alethia that it's one part of a larger kind of organizing work that needs to be done to strengthen our multiracial democracy.
And coming to you, Stephanie, as a labor researcher and reporter, what are you seeing specifically or feeling specifically from a labor point of view?
Well, it's a really interesting time of two directions as well. And I think, partly this democracy question is people losing faith in an idea of a collective humanity. And I think returning to the roots of base building, of really organizing coworker to coworker, neighbor to neighbor, is how we're going to get beyond this, whether it's, whatever the results of this actual election, we need to do that hard work of restoring our faith in our relationships with one another.
So tell us a little bit about the work that you're seeing on the ground and that you're involved in. What are you actually, how have you been spending this year so far?
Sure, yeah. Well, part of the challenge is there are a number of unions that feel that they're really stuck in even having political conversations within the union at all, that members are divided strongly about their vision of the future. And I think they have, employers have been very successful at this divide and conquer strategy of making workers' vulnerability, they think it's a threat from abroad, or they think it's a threat from a person that looks different from them. So a lot of what I've been doing is a curriculum called Defending Democracy, which is about how to help unions have that conversation within the union, how to talk about democracy, what it means in the workplace, as well as what it means in society, and the historic role unions have in defending democracy.
What about you, Alethia? I mean, on the labor front, it seems like the Democrats and the Republicans are addressing working people, but different working people in different geographic regions. It seems to me that north-south divide has been critical when it comes to sort of divide and rule tactics inside unions.
I'm afraid those tactics work in the North as well as in the South, unfortunately. I think the North has a very long and sometimes overlooked history of division, of electoral exploitation. It's not very well known, but when the Voting Rights Act was in effect, New York City was covered by Section 5, and any change in our electoral rules in New York City had to be pre-cleared by the Justice Department, that the ways in which the electoral machine worked is that it exploited the votes and deterred the votes of people of color quite often. And I think by overlooking the divisions that occur in the North, it's one of the reasons why we missed how the Republicans got their margin of victory in the House in upstate New York.
So are you
in
worried?
Those congressional races.
You're right. That is an underappreciated aspect of what happened when the Voting Rights Act federal protections, oversight protections, were withdrawn or were overturned by the Supreme Court. Has that been addressed here, do you think? Do you think the protections are in better shape today? Voting rights in the North, particularly in New York, are in better shape today?
I think so, in terms of making sure everyone can understand the vote by printing material in their own language. But it does mean that we have to be attentive to how electoral processes actually work. And I do think we have to pay attention to Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, right, other places in this state, but all over the country, and not take anywhere for granted. When you look at Michigan, for example, which was a red state, it passed a right to work law, and it took 10 years of deliberate organizing in that state, strategic organizing, to make it a blue state again, and to repeal the right to work law. So we shouldn't take any place for granted, and we shouldn't write off rural areas either.
Your worst case scenario, Maria, what are you seeing? What concerns you right now, particularly with respect to workplace organizing?
I mean, well, just a worst case scenario would be that we elect an autocrat in November. I mean, there's no certainty that Donald Trump will not be reelected. So I think that would take us down a very dark path. He's made his plans very clear through the Project 2025 and, how government would be used to punish opponents, weaponization of the Department of Justice. So all the worst case scenarios, the mass deportation of immigrants. So those plans are all very clear. So I do think we have a moral and a strategic imperative in this moment to prevent that scenario from playing out. But then beyond that, yes, we still have racialized forms of authoritarianism, even in the North, with mass incarceration, with policing. So all of these challenges persist regardless of the outcome of the election. And in the South, we still have some states where, which would be classified as authoritarian enclaves, where, voter suppression is taking place, where, government institutions are being used to suppress opponents and dissent, where we have book bans, where we have anti-protester bills. So these elements of the authoritarian playbook persist, and notably at the state level. And so we definitely have our work cut out for ourselves in terms of pushing back and presenting and working towards an alternative democracy grounded in the rights and liberties of all Americans.
We're going to come back to what are some of the strategies that you're seeing, working. But first, I want to just continue the conversation about working to oppose what. We've talked about Trump to some extent, but I've heard all of you say it's not just about this candidate. So post-election, if indeed the Republican candidate is defeated, what happens to Trumpism and all the Trumpites out there? Maria.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly the point that, we're seeing Trumpism, and, this is one of the significant challenges we have is that Trumpism and kind of an authoritarian faction has taken over one of our two major political parties. And that's playing out at the state and local level, whether it's through school board elections, whether it's through state legislatures. So we're seeing these elements of authoritarianism. We're seeing like the endorsement of political violence. We're seeing, dehumanizing rhetoric. We're seeing the book bans. We're seeing the voter suppression. So all of these challenges are with us and absolutely require different types of organizing, coalition building to push back, while articulating an alternative vision for the country.
All right, we're going to take a quick break, but come back. Don't go away. You are watching CityWorks. Welcome back to CityWorks. We're talking about electoral politics and movement building. Our guest today recently participated in a day-long conference at the CUNY School of Labor and Urban Studies called Ensuring Democracy's Future. And many of the issues we're discussing now were tackled there. Here are a few excerpts.
Block and build is a strategic framework drawn from seeing the motion that is already happening in society and trying to give focus to the tasks that face those of us who are for social justice and a transformative political agenda. There's two components. The block side. That means blocking the drive for authoritarian rule. Of course, that takes place at the ballot box, but it doesn't only take place at the ballot box. It takes place in the public square. It takes place in every fight over in school boards in local areas around the country. It takes place in the defense of voting rights. It takes place in the defense of union rights. That's the block side. Then there's the build side. We need to build our organizations. We need to build the trade union movement, revitalizing the labor movement. We need to work round the clock, not only at election time, but 24/7, to build a working class base that sees the need for a robust, multiracial, and gender-inclusive democracy and structural change.
Life on a day-to-day is just hard for New Yorkers. And we're hearing from people that getting to their doctor's appointments is hard because they don't have access to the transportation that they need. Getting access to quality food and healthy food is still hard in New York because we still have food deserts. And so as a nation or as a state that has prided itself on being one of the wealthiest states and the wealthiest nation, Why are our people struggling so much? Why are we fighting with a mayor to make sure our kids can have access to 3K? Why are we fighting with our mayor to make sure that our libraries can be open 7 days a week? These are really basic things that we shouldn't even have to be fighting for, but yet here we are in really big fights with those in power. And so that means it's time for some leadership changes. It's time that the people in office really know that they have to represent us. It is not about what Wall Street wants. It's not about the real estate industry. It is about everyday New Yorkers who are trying to thrive in this city and this state who are struggling.
So the UAW, I am the regional director. I represent 50,000 active and retired members in Region 9A, which is up here in New York City, Long Island, New England, and Puerto Rico. And we've gone under some, incredible transformations over the last 2 years. Especially it's been accelerated over the last about year and a half. Our union is not the union that you see now, right, in social media and in our strikes and in our organizing that we've been doing over the past year, especially. Our union was stuck in a really horrible period, right, in which the leadership no longer led a strong labor movement, right, within our union. Corruption, apathy, company unionism had really taken over, right? And we were a part of, and I individually was also part of a movement, and still am, of rank and file reformers who wanted to steer our union back in the right direction. Not only because it was good on its own end, right? But because we knew just how powerful the UAW could be and how much potential it was wasting. So anything from properly representing our members and getting the best contracts possible, to organizing new workers, to really just fundamentally setting the platform in this country for what working class politics could be and what we could demand of our bosses, of our government, and of all of those in power. So I think that's what the movement, which was coalesced around UAWD, the Democracy Caucus within the UAW, really set out to do. And with some state intervention, right, like different conditions sometimes come together. We were able to have a referendum. We called it the one member, one vote referendum, in which the union, after a couple of presidents were put in prison for corruption scandals, taking money from the companies that we were supposed to be bargaining against. We had a referendum to change the way we elect our leadership. That referendum passed in 2021. And then all of 21 through 22, we spent putting together a team ultimately led by Shawn Fain to take over the union.
So that's just a taste. Following the conference, I think the question is next steps, and that's really what I want to hear about from each of you. I mean, Stephanie, starting with you, you wrote a whole book on nine ways to save the world, something like that?
Yes, 7 strategies.
Seven strategies to change the world.
Yeah. So the idea is that we feel like, not just labor, but other social movements, we've been on the defensive for a long time. We've been playing it safe, partly due to red baiting within our movements that prevents us from talking about big ideas or anti-intellectualism. And meanwhile, the right wing has been strategizing and planning to take over the world. So we've been working with organizers to think about what is the power that we actually have, what is the power we need to build, and how do we look at a 10 to 20 to 30-year plan for governance. What would it look like if we were in charge? And we try and respect different lineages of social change and what can we learn from one another, seeing ourselves working in a movement ecosystem together rather than competing and being more than the sum of our parts.
Yeah, one of the points that Max Elbaum made at the conference was about the long history of backlash, forward movement. What do you draw from the past for this moment, Alethia? What do you think is Alethia?
Persistence, right? It's always darkest before the dawn, that we're in an intergenerational fight. Trumpists and Trumpism isn't going anywhere. Whether Trump wins or loses, even if he loses, he'll still have a microphone. So these are long-term problems within American democracy and government. And so to take the long view is really, really important.
And concretely on the ground, how are you going to be spending this month?
How will I be spending this month? teaching my students as best as I can, continuing the work of developing a project that can bring labor educators and social justice educators together so that they can identify, share problems, strategize together, initiate different ways of engaging in productive conversations across differences. We have to strengthen our coalitions.
Coalitions, conversations. You've also written about clown power, Maria. Coming to you, you've looked at what works globally, locally. Any strategies you want to lift up that maybe people could find out more about in the next few weeks?
Sure. Well, the thing about autocracy is that all of these autocrats have profound vulnerabilities. And like even autocrats that seem remarkably strong and powerful ultimately are weak at the end of the day. And so what we know about a lot of effective pro-democracy movements globally, and more recently, like what we've seen in France when they push back against the far-right Marine Le Pen party, what we've seen recently in Poland when the Civic Coalition defeated the far-right Law and Justice Party, what we saw in Brazil when electorally Brazilians organize across race, class, geography to defeat former President Bolsonaro, and then stopped a coup that was very much modeled on January 6th in our country. So what has been key to all of those movements is that they've brought people together across difference. And so having large, diverse participation, people coming together from different sectors of society, notably unions and organized labor, also professional associations, religious institutions, businesses, student groups, cultural associations. So engaging actively these different pillars is very key to the success of pro-democracy movements. And we also know that shaking things up tactically is important. So not just relying on a single set of tactics, whether it be marches and demonstrations, but being able to draw on a wider repertoire of things like walkouts and strikes and boycotts and die-ins, things that, again, labor has been historically incredibly effective at in this country and around the world. So tactical innovation is so key, and really finding ways to move people within these different pillars, both through engagement strategies, dialogue, engaging with members of the business community, with veterans associations, with faith leaders in our communities, bringing them into a pro-democracy campaign and movement is all really critically important. And then preparing for repression. I think Alethia mentioned at the beginning the threats of political violence that have been with us for decades, for many years in this country, but are seeing a resurgence around the country when, school board members, election workers, people of color, protesters are facing various forms of political violence. So we have to prepare our communities to respond, to organize, to go on offense, to use things like humor strategically, and to develop different tactics so that you can pull the wind out of the sail of those perpetrators of political violence and their supporters.
I love the story that you tell about the clowns and the white flower.
Yes, exactly. So this has been a strategy to challenge neo-Nazi groups around the world where, when neo-Nazis have gone out in places like Wunsiedel in Germany, they've marched through town. So instead of coming out and confronting them, and having kind of more, angry confrontations, the towns decided to, for example, organize an involuntary walkathon. So for every meter these neo-Nazis marched, the town raised money for de-radicalization organizations. So just a counterintuitive tactics. And then as other kind of KKK white supremacist types marched, the clowns would come out and for white power, they threw out flower power. And so, different tactics work in different contexts. So there's no blueprint, but doing things that are counterintuitive and that take the wind out of the sails of the hate and the demonization and the anger of a lot of these, white supremacist far-right groups is really, really important. And laughter can be a very powerful antidote to tyranny and authoritarianism.
I laughed when I read it. White power, white flower. I like it a lot. You two are working with students. And we haven't talked about the fact that a lot of students this year, and not just students, but a lot of people this year got involved in an anti-war, anti-genocide, anti-conflict movement that didn't know how to engage with the election except for by protesting. How do you come back onto campus after the election and address the legacy of division among students, all of whom wanting better world, and some so heartbroken about what was happening in Gaza and Palestine and Congo and Sudan that they couldn't cast a vote this time around? Alethia.
What I've heard from my students who were at the City College campus, or some of them visited the Columbia University campus, which is my alma mater, is that the occupations were incredibly loving, incredibly informative. People were cooking for each other. They were holding teach-ins for each other. They were learning so much about Israel and Palestine and different communities. And it was really a multiracial, multi-religious space. And it is the presence of the police that created all of the violence. I think the strategies around the election is a difficult one. And my understanding is that the uncommitted movement made a really important intervention for the primaries, right? And their strategy for the general election is, up for debate and can be quite different. Look, we are the country that we are, the United States. We have the largest weapons and military of the entire globe, and that's not changing overnight. I often say that voting in elections is not the dating game. You're not looking for a long-term partner. You make a strategic choice in that moment, and you then leverage that as much as you can after the election to keep trying to move policy in the direction that you want.
Anything you'd add to that, Stephanie?
Well, I think, for people that are frustrated, we're always in this bad choice. We never are choosing between the two people we love or two great candidates. We're always confronted with these difficult choices. And so the challenge is, how do we think longer term so that we're in a better position next time around? We've built the power. If we're looking for something that's going to be different 4 years from now, what do we need to do in the meantime to get to that place? What's the terrain? In the same sense, what we're voting for is the terrain on which we want to fight. And so I think we work with our students and with the unions and other organizations to think about, how do we move beyond just taking stands on things or knowing what's right morally, and actually having that deep base building that's going to get us the power that's going to influence the choices that the parties make.
All right, well, all of you, thank you so much. Alethia Jones, Stephanie Luce, Maria Stephan, wonderful speaking with you. That's it for CityWorks. If you have comments or questions, write to us at cityworks@slu.cuny.edu. And be sure to download the new CUNY TV app, where you can watch our show and all of CUNY TV's other programming. For CityWorks, I'm Laura Flanders. Thanks for joining us.